often thought a reality show about a church could end up being one of the most entertaining shows on cable. If I didn't think the program would most likely bring dishonor to the name of Christ, I would probably support the idea. The elements that make reality TV a hit with the American public are unfortunately far too often represented in our churches. Most reality shows revolve around a collection of people who are self-absorbed and self-serving, and it is the interaction between those people as each attempts to get their own way that creates most of the petty drama that seems to captivate the American people so much. I've sat back and shook my head at some of the most petty and destructive squabbles in the church and wondered how it is even possible we might call ourselves followers of Christ. I had a friend who was on staff at a church that was growing. They were adding people and as such were expanding their facilities. Now, in my experience, quite often, there's not a more disunifying chapter in the story of a church than when the church undertakes a building project. Every person has a different idea about how things should be done. And because many have taken on financial sacrifices to accomplish a task, each feels the right to see the project done in a way that matches their own proclivities. Usually, the greater the sacrifice, the greater the demand for compliance. This particular expansion required a new secondary vestibule. This was simply an airlock designed to keep the cold air out as people were opening and closing the doors in the winter and to provide a place where people could wipe their feet. It had no great impact on the mission of the church and was not remarkable in its historical significance. It was simply a vestibule. But in this case, it wasn't. You see, there was a plan for the color and shape of the tile, a plan for the color and width of the grout. There was a plan, and it was a plan that was approved and funded by a large donor. But something happened. Between the donation and the installation, whoever installed the tile and the grout was not in tune with the plan. Instead of installing white grout, it was gray. Now, for most people, this is a fairly irrelevant happening. Gray tile with gray grout, gray tiles with white grout, who cares? Well, who cares is the member of the church that gave money to the project. They were aghast. How could our church allow this travesty to continue? If we are going to be a church that reflects the excellency of God, we cannot be satisfied with gray grout. A solution to the problem was explored at the urging of the donor, and it was discovered that what would be required is a full relaying of the floor. The tiles must be pulled up and new tile laid and the offending grout removed and replaced. This to most seemed an unreasonable expense, with all that was central to the church's ministry that required funding, children's areas, food shelves, world missions. It seemed unwise to commit the funds to such a minor concern. But this was not the feeling of all. No, the large donor believed it was necessary, and after several meetings and threats to leave the church unless the grout was changed, the pastor relented and agreed. This did not solve the problem, though. Others who believed this to be folly left the church, and there were hard feelings that lingered long after the shiny new vestibule was put into place. The unity of the body was shattered by the grout in a vestibule. If only the story was unique in its nature. There's a sense of entitlement that permeates a culture that is me-centric. It is a belief in the right to defend your rights. It's a belief that your want and desire is just as valid and to be embraced by others as anyone else's. It is the belief that you should be heard and have the opportunity to get your way. When you are the center of your existence, it doesn't take long until you believe you should be the center of everyone else's. Our political, economic, and even familial structures reflect that mindset. Each of these institutions that dominate our society are approached with the mentality that is focused on navigating these environments in a way that will best get me my way. Compromise is only used with the idea of getting as much of my will implemented as possible. If there is a way to get the whole thing without paying too high a price, that is what we will aim for. But if not, I will work to get as much of what I want as I can. Each individual is pulling in his or her own direction, and it is within the self-serving tension that our culture resides. But this is not the way the church is supposed to operate. In fact, the church is supposed to stand in direct contrast to this worldly practice. And when it does, it demonstrates the work of Christ in the hearts and lives of his people. It is human nature to be self-absorbed. It is Christ's divine nature at work in his church to prefer others.